Whoa, good day, grade 10 students. Today what we're learning about is properties of matter, and we're going to talk about two things, physical and chemical properties. Here we go. Okay, so for physical properties, it's basically a characteristic of the substance. It's a substance that you use your senses. So you have five senses. You can use something, a smell, an odor, a texture, how it feels, the color, hardness, melting point. Okay, well, what does this mean? Well, the physical properties of a piece of paper, for example, I got a piece of paper right here. This piece of paper is smooth. And because it is smooth, that's a physical property of it, because I'm feeling it, okay? It has no odor. That's a physical property, no odor at all. And it's fairly bendable. This is a physical property of this substance. Now, you can think of any physical substance or physical property of any substance that you want. But it's something that you have to detect with your senses. It has nothing to do with any sort of chemistry or chemical properties of that. So a physical change, for example, is a change in a physical property, but the substance remains the same. It isn't in a different form. I didn't change the molecule. So if I rip this paper apart, it's still paper. Even though I can't put it back together, I didn't change the chemical properties of this piece of paper. I changed the physical properties. I changed the shape of it. So that's it. So what is a chemical property? A chemical property is when you create a new substance. So if I'm going to burn this paper, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm at home, and my wife wouldn't like that, or my kids, but it would change into a new substance. That means that if I burn this and turn it into it actually would turn into a gas called CO2 and water vapor. I can't turn that back into paper on my own. Okay, so it's very difficult to do. Even though a physical property, you rip this apart, you think you can't put it back together. Well, I can add some water and mush it up and then dry that water again. I can recycle paper and it's still paper. But once we burn it, it's a chemical reaction and we can't turn it back into paper. So a new substance is being produced. So anything that is a result of a chemical reaction represents a chemical property. So a chemical property, to back up a little bit, the chemical property of this paper is that it can burn. So a chemical change is describing when a new substance or with new chemical physical properties is formed. And what you have is you have, just give me a second here, I'm going to pause. So if you have some reactant represented by this R and we do a chemical reaction, this is what this arrow means, and we have products. So on the left hand side you will always have reactants, and on the right hand side you will always have products, what you're making. So reactants are what you're reacting and products are what you're making. And this is how we show chemical reactions. So if we'd have like our reactants over here, products over here. Pretty straightforward, I hope. Ask me if you have any questions. So there's 5 clues that we have a chemical reaction happening. And the first clue that you have is a gas is formed. So, oh, this is terrible. But if you leave food in your fridge for a long time and you don't tell your parents and you open up the fridge and you're like, oh, that's terrible, it smells. Well, that's might be because a gas is being formed in your fridge. And that means a chemical reaction is happening. So if you ever have an odor, there's a color change. If your food, your bread, you might leave it in your, well, I don't know if you leave it in your fridge, but if you left your bread out and it started forming these little colonies and changing colors and things like that, that's a hint that a chemical reaction might be happening. A precipitate. What the heck is that? A precipitate is a solid being formed. So if I add 2 liquids together, ooh, that's a beaker with some chemicals, this is a beaker with some more chemicals, and you put them together and they're no longer liquids, but then now there's a solid that suddenly shows up somehow. That is an example of a precipitate, and that means a chemical reaction has happened. Another example is heat or light. When you light paper on fire, it actually gets hot and light is being produced. That's an example of a chemical change. And finally, the reaction is irreversible. This means that once I burn this paper and I turn it into a gas, I can't take that gas and turn it back into paper. I can't take the ashes from a fire and turn it back into paper. It just can't happen. So that means it's irreversible. Okay, so it's difficult for us to reverse. So all these things mean a new substance is being produced. And whenever we form a new chemical, it's a chemical change. All right, so here we have, is this a chemical or a physical change? You got some fireworks. Well, take a moment. What do you think? What's your example? There's heat and light being produced, so that is a chemical change. Correct. Excellent. Here's a picture taken from Utah. This is some, I don't know what that is, just a rock. Take a look at that. You can see some weird things are going with the rock. Is that an example? Did it get that way because of a chemical or physical change? Well, the answer is that this is water erosion, and it's just water shaping and changing the rocks, not chemically, but just shaping it. And this is an example of a physical change because it's still rock. It's just changed in terms of the shape, okay, that you have here. So that's a good guess. Even though it is, it's be difficult to change it or make it irreversible, this is an example of a physical change. All right, so what are the 5 things that tell us that we have a chemical change? The first thing is that we have a color change. I had to go back and look at the video. I forgot about color change. So color change is one. Heat or light is another. Gas being produced is another. Precipitate, which is a solid being formed, is the fourth. Whoop, there we go, fourth. And the fifth is that it's irreversible. It can't go back to the way it was. So that's an example of. And if it doesn't have those things, then that probably means it's a physical change. So a physical property describes anything like it by the 5 senses. A chemical property describes all the chemical reactions that a substance can undergo. That's the end of the video. There's a few questions for you here at the end here, so hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you later.